Hello everyone, Spicy Toast Gaming here, and welcome to our tier list for Lissandra. So this tier list is only into Lissandra, only ranking them into how they perform in Lissandra. This is not necessarily relevant for any other part of the game. So even if a champion is amazing in every other part, if they just get completely hard countered and suck into Lissandra and they can't beat it, well, everyone can beat it. But if they have much harder time, then they're going to be lower, and vice versa. If there's a champion that is pretty bad everywhere else, but is really good into Lissandra, they're going to be a lot higher. Also, for this tier list, we're considering everyone at level 30, 3 stars, any epic relics. Lissandra is the toughest challenge in the game, and it's very much supposed to be a end game challenge, and probably supposed to be relevant for when constellations come out. We can get our champions up to like 6 stars. So no, not everyone is going to be able to use the builds that we recommend, but we just want to put out the best builds possible for people. I might do another tier list later that's just talking about like rare relics, but for this one we're considering everyone at their maximum power. Now we will be showing you a build for the champion for Lissandra on the side when we are talking about them, and we'll briefly go over them. So it's kind of not only a tier list, but also kind of a build video as well, because we want to give people some helpful advice to try to get through and clear this adventure. Now, I will say a lot of these builds are going to be fairly similar just because it's the often best, most consistent option. So I'm not thrilled with how many times we had to reuse the same builds, but some of them just work really well. And I'll talk about some of the builds you're going to see a lot right now. So first, there is Star Forged Gauntlets. Using this on any champion just so you can get that +1 starting mana, so you can just ramp up a little bit faster. It's very helpful and really consistent. All of these fights, they get so much more mana than you, and you just don't have enough resources to keep up. So that +1 starting mana is really important. So sadly, that is going to be used a lot. And then for a lot of the cheaper champions, Oath of the Guardians plus double star gems is really, really good, specifically because Lissandra likes to take out your single target threats. If you can have multiple big units on the board, so she doesn't have just like one unit to obliterate or something like that, that really helps your power into Lissandra. So for a lot of these cheaper champions, we are going to be recommending that build, and that is specifically the reason why. As far as how the tier list is laid out, the order in the line isn't going to matter. We're just putting them all out alphabetically. But I will say for the A and the B tier, those do have 2 different lines, and it is going to be top of A tier and bottom of A tier, and the same with the B tier. So there will be a little bit more distinction there. Also, I will say both the rankings as well as all of the builds were done with my entire Twitch chat. So this isn't actually just me putting this all together. I was able to talk with normally around 50 to 60 people about all of these different options, get more feedback, and try to get a general consensus on all the rankings. So for most of the rankings, everyone either agreed, or at most they thought a champion would be maybe like 1 higher or 1 lower. Put a lot of time and effort into this tier list, been working on it for, well, since Lissandra came out. So if you enjoy it, if you appreciate all the effort that went into this, a like and a subscribe is greatly appreciated. If you want to catch my stream, there's links to that down below, and let's get into it. So up first, we have Atrox. Atrox is quite a solid champion. You can really struggle to get ahead though. You are a very unit-focused champion, so when you go up against enemies that just have much larger units, you can't actually get those strikes off and get that cost reduction. You can struggle a little bit. Normally, if you can get ahead, you can stay ahead, but overall, still a bit on the slow side, so we really recommend using those Star Forged Gauntlets, pairing that with the Luminous Orb for that extra mana, and then the Beast Within just to make sure all of your units have that overwhelm, and then most of them are also going to get that 1/1 because they do have that subtype. So for Atrox, we actually put him in the top of B tier. Next up then, we have Annie, a very solid champion that has a massive amount of control and really good hard removal. Your Disintegrates let you take out any target regardless of health, as long as you can deal 1 damage to them. So very good for dealing with the Watcher or any of the big units you might encounter. Annie just has so much control that she really dominates this whole adventure. She was one of the easiest runs I had without getting any crazy powers. And the build on screen is simple but very consistent. You get Annie on the board, Archangel Staff giving you that mana so you can always play your Guile and your other spells. Luden's Tempest is nice, increasing all of your damage. That one is definitely a bit more of a flex pick though. If you wanted to swap that out for something else, definitely can do that there. But the Grand General's counterplan is really good. It's making it so you disintegrate, or you're getting one every single round, and that is how you can take out those big enemy targets. But it's also just a 1-cost draw 1 with your items on it. So if you need to just pop spell shields, use it as some extra draw, very versatile. And if they take out your Annie, you then have a fleeting copy you can play every single round. Overall, really solid champion, and she will be our first addition up in the S tier. Ashe is up next, and overall, control is very strong into Lissandra. However, the Frostbites are just a lot weaker than the hard CC or hard removal that many other champions have. Frostbite really just struggles a little bit more. So for Ashe, we do recommend using that Beast Within for that Overwhelm. You're not really going to get any of that 1-1, but I think giving all your units Overwhelm could be quite handy, because with her star powers, if you hit a target that has 0 health, your unit is then granted 1-1, or if you kill that unit. And so being able to use all your vulnerable and challenger units to kill enemy frostbitten units and scale them up, but still have that extra damage go through and hit the Nexus, that is very nice. Now, if you don't want to go for that sort of playstyle and you just want to frostbite the entire enemy board and then try to attack and not have any of them get blocked at all, then you could move away from Overwhelm, but I think it's pretty good. Also pairing that with the Archangel Staff as well as Grand General's counterplan, very similar to Annie. You just want to have that consistent control and mana to spend your spells every single round. And then you have another fleeting copy of your champion, just in case the enemy takes them off the board. You can try to play them again. Granted, it is a lot more difficult with a 4-cost Ashe than it is with a 1-cost Annie. Overall, still a decent champion, but definitely struggles compared to most of the other control decks, and can often be too slow and struggle to end the games. So Ashe actually is going down in the bottom of B tier. Next up then, we have Relansoul. Now this one's going to be pretty simple and straightforward. Relansoul is just about the most broken champion in the game by design, and so we're obviously going to put him up in the S tier. Now for relics, I really like the Starforged Gauntlets to get that extra mana, and you really work well with that extra Invoke. Disciple of Shadows, I like it to be able to get him on the board as soon as possible, paired with that Crown Guard so that when he hits the board and levels up, because all of your units level up when you play them, he then rallies, and so you can just attack and try to end the game. But for Relansoul, the relics don't matter as much because you're just so broken, but this is still a really solid build. But again, he's just going up in that S tier. Next up, we have a Bard. Really fun scaling champion, and can be okay into Lissandra. You do have some good ability to deal with their bigger units with their mini-morph, and potentially you can get some great scaling off, get some good keywords, such as like lifesteal, heal up, and when you actually have Bard maxed out, he can scale fairly quickly, especially Bard himself. For a solid build, I think you really need the Starforged Gauntlets on him. I tried it without, and it was very miserable. Definitely need that extra mana to get your Bard on the board as soon as possible. Corrupted Star Fragment, also a must in my opinion. Great to getting all those extra stats and keywords on your Bard, and then all those stats you're getting also count towards his level up, so you can get him leveled very fast. Bard definitely those struggles with often being the one main target for the enemy to attack or try to obliterate. You can get a lot of spell shields on your Bard, but still you run into that problem. So a decent champion, but definitely outshined by many others. He's going down in the B tier. Darius is up next, and Darius definitely struggles here. The best part of Darius's deck is just being able to rush down the enemy as fast as possible, chaining a bunch of rallies back to back and just overwhelming the enemy. The issue is the enemy's units are often just bigger than your units, and they have enough Nexus health that you really can't rush them down. With Darius, you have to hit a certain critical mass of your units so you can trigger your second star power, get that rally going. But often what happens is you'll attack and the enemy just has bigger units, they block you, and there's not much you can do, unfortunately. As far as builds, I do think you need the extra mana to just be able to play your units and the cards you need. Now you need a stat relic to trigger the Titanic. I like going for the extra attack of the Warhammer, but there's many other stat relics you could use. Also, I do enjoy the Crown Guard Inheritance, so you can try to drop Darius. Hopefully he's going to level then and can give you another rally. But Darius definitely struggles in this adventure. His unit-focused aggro playstyle is just hard countered by Lissandra. All of her frostbites, obliterates, massive units, huge health pools. There's really not much Darius can do unless you get very, very lucky. So sadly, he's going down in the D tier. Diana is up next, and she's going to be our first addition to the Oath build. Now, while Diana does have many other builds that focus on her and make her a very powerful champion, that's actually pretty heavily countered by Lissandra, which is why you want to go for the Oath build. You're able to get many other big units on the board, and since you can play Diana round 1, get her on the board, trigger that Oath of the Guardians, and then whatever units you draw, you can probably play, if not the first round, in the following rounds. Also, Diana's star powers work very well with Oath of the Guardians because you have the effect of if you play a unit that already has quick attack, it then is given or granted double attack. Many champions in the game have that quick attack, and so very often the champions you pull out with Oath, you can then grant them that double attack as well. You can just have an entire board full of massive champions, which dramatically increases the power of Diana. While playing Diana and going through Lissandra, I felt like I was the final boss, just decimating every single target, and it was a lot of fun. Still not quite as consistent as many of the control decks, and while her Lissandra performance isn't quite as good as it is in many other parts of the game, she's still a very strong champion, especially with this build, so she's going into the top of A tier. Ekko is up next, and for Ekko, I still like to go for that Star-Forged Gauntlet build, but for Ekko, he has a much higher attack pool than he does a health pool. So you can go for double stat relics on him, but if you have them, you can also throw in the Spectral Scissors because those give you 2 power. So that's a bit of a bonus and not something you have to rely on, but if you have the Scissors, works great for a stat relic and can really make Ekko feel a lot better. There's a lot of crazy combos you can do for Ekko, starting with 1 extra mana really helps you out, and then that added versatility of being able to trigger summon effects again with your Spectral Scissors is a great bonus to have. But if you don't want to use it, you can just have Ekko be attacking from the right and have him supporting no one. You don't have to rely on them. Overall, a solid champion, and his combo potential within Lissandra really helps him out, and so he's actually going to the top of B tier. Elder Dragon is up next, and while still a very fun champion, actually a little bit weaker than I was expecting for the Lissandra, especially with some of the triple epic builds. Elder Dragon is still a unit-focused deck and focus on just dropping these massive units on the board. Sadly, Lissandra is very good at countering that type of playstyle, so it does reduce down your power a little bit. As far as builds, Starforged Gauntlets, obviously great. You don't have to do anything to trigger it. You just get that extra starting mana. Beast Within, very, very good, and I would consider this also a must for Elder Dragon. Giving all your units Overwhelm, and then the additional 1/1, because pretty much everything's a dragon, really helps you out. Disciple of Shadows, I think it's really good for Elder Dragon, but this one would be a little bit more of a flex pick if you wanted to throw on a different epic relic, or just different relic in general. But trying to get him on the board a little bit earlier is still worthwhile, so that's what I would recommend. While he did perform a little bit worse than I was expecting into Lissandra, still an overall great champion, so he is going in that bottom of A tier. Elise is up next, and is quite a interesting one. She's trying to play a very aggro, but also kind of scaling playstyle with all of her Spiderlings. And while she does have some of the same drawbacks as Darius, where you're very unit focused and Lissandra's really good at shutting down your units, Elise often has ways that she can try to get around the enemy and still do damage, where Darius, for the most part, you're just having to try to punch through the enemy. That really doesn't work for Lissandra. With Elise, though, it's very easy to give your Spiderlings just ridiculously good keywords to help you still rush down and try to do as much damage as possible. As far as relics, Spirit of the Buru is a must in my opinion. Making sure all your Spiderlings have that quick attack, fury, and overwhelm at the start of the game is incredible. Voidborn Carapace also really nice because you can grant all your Spiderlings that elusive, so they get an extra 2/2. Although you could swap this out for something like Gale Force if you wanted to give them Scout. but then you'd have to deal with your Elise getting recalled. That one's a little bit more of a judgment call. And then the new common relic, Dreams of Yordles, is actually very solid. So it's a relic that gives your champion that impact as well as spirit. Well, every time you attack with Elise, you're then also granting that to your unit. So essentially it's working as a boost to give them all or grant them all 1/1 and that impact. If you are using this relic as well, you could swap out that Voidborn Carapace to throw on the Fear Cleaving Axe so that you're literally boosting all your units. So Elise actually feeling a bit of a bump after this patch and is even stronger than before. She's going to the bottom of A tier. Evelyn is up next, and with this build, you have massive amounts of control, and for Lissandra, control is really the name of the game, especially some hard control like stuns. So for this build, Starforge plus Luminous Orbs, you hit that Titanic value, so you start at 3 mana, which is great, and then we're also going with that Tempest Blade, so every time Evelyn levels up, which should be every single round after the first, she's going to stun the entire enemy board. This is amazing. Your general game plan is the first round, you just play one of your units that generates a husk, and then the next round you play Evelyn. You just focus on leveling her every single round. She's scaling up all your units to ridiculous amounts, stunning the entire enemy board, and then you're just able to attack with your massive units, ending the game while the entire enemy is stunned. I tried Evelyn without this build with one of her more normal, just all level up relic builds. Really struggled, but once I switched over to this, it was absolutely incredible. She is going up in the S tier. Garen is up next, and he has many of the same difficulties that Darius does, just really needing to rely on his units, and rely on his units just being able to be bigger than the enemy's units. And quite often that really doesn't happen, especially into Lissandra herself, so you can struggle to scale up your units. However, your scaling is still easier than it is for Darius because he can only buff up the first unit he plays every round. With Garen, as long as they're getting strikes off, they can keep scaling, and you generally have a little bit of an easier time over Darius. As far as the build, I still think Starforged is the way to go. Getting that extra mana is just really important, and the Beast Within is quite nice, making sure all units have that overwhelm, and then many of your units have a tag of either elite, if not like bird, for subtype, so they're also getting that additional 1/1, which is really good for you. But Darius is still not really cut out for this adventure, sadly, so he's down in the C tier. Nar is up next, and he actually recently got a couple changes and overall buffs in the most recent patch, and he's actually pretty good in the Lissandra adventure, despite what most people would probably initially think. He is definitely helped by the fact that he actually has some consistent control. He's able to generate a stun spell every single round. He also has some solid removal and great damage. As far as a build, I really like going for the Scourge's Stash plus the Powder Monkeys. That way, once you get your Plunder effect off, which is pretty easy to do, you can play Nar for 0 mana. The Powder Monkey also gives you scaling for Nar throughout the entire match, so he's just getting stronger and stronger. And then the Beast Within, really nice, again, giving all your units that overwhelm on top of all the impact they're also getting. And then just about all of them have a subtype, so they're also getting that additional 1/1. Really nice right there. That being said, if you don't want to go for this type of build, you could maybe go for something focusing on like a Grand General's Counterplan or Echoing Spirit, where you have more copies of Nar in your deck, so you can just play more of these wallops and focus more on a controlled playstyle. But as far as me, this is my go-to build. And while Nar is still on the weaker side overall, he actually puts in quite a good performance for Lissandra, so he's going to the bottom of B tier. Gwen is up next, and this is actually our first relic build, not the only one, but our first one that doesn't have an epic relic. Now, you still could put the Beast Within instead of the Troll King's Crown, but just this full rare relic build is quite solid and has been like the go-to Gwen build for quite a long time. Gwen is very good. You're fine with a lot of your units dying. You're able to stack up that Hallowed buff. And with the amount of drain you have, you're able to fully heal every encounter, which is incredibly strong into the Lissandra adventure, where there's just almost no healing at all. So any champion that has sustain just feels a bit better. That was actually one of the reasons why Atrox is a little bit higher than some of the other very unit-focused decks, such as like Darius and Garen. For Gwen, though, with this build, you're able to attack, get a massive bonus from your Hallowed stacks. With that Overwhelm, you're able to punch through and make sure you're doing damage to the Nexus. You're normally going to level up in your first attack with Gwen. That level up then giving you a rally, so you still have this massive hallowed buff. You can then attack again, stacking it a second time. And with that Luden's Tempest, it's doubling the attack of your skill, or doubling the drain. So you're just able to do a ton of damage, draining, healing up. You do still have an issue of the fact that you can get shut down since Gwen is your main win condition. But even with that, Gwen does have some ways out of it, of potentially able to atrocity herself or things like that to still finish out the game. So while there are ways for Lissandra to shut you down, still a very good champion and going to the top of A tier. Alawi is up next and plays very similarly to Gwen, just without the extra bonus of healing to full after every fight. For Alawi though, we like to run the Starforged Gauntlets for that extra starting mana. Since you have 6 health, you can actually not go with the Luminous Orb. You still can if you want, but I like going for the Fist for the extra 1 damage. It actually can help you out quite a lot. Normally with Alawi, you're able to play her on your second turn, attack, rally, and then attack again. Similarly to Gwen, when you attack, you get a temporary attack buff. And so being able to attack twice in a single round just does so much damage, and you can normally one-shot the enemy. Maybe not against Lissandra because she has so much health, but most other targets. And you're putting that pressure on so early that you can often just defeat the enemy before they're able to do too much to you. Alawi also has one of the just best made decks in the game, so she is also going up in that A tier. Jack is up next, and he definitely struggles in this adventure. As far as relics, pretty much the same as always, trying to get that extra mana. So Starforged and Luminous, pretty mandatory. The bottom relic is much more of a flex pick. Archangel's Staff is great for getting that extra mana, and then when that refills at round start, it triggers your star powers to deal damage to the enemy board. But Jack just really struggles to be able to overwhelm the enemy and close out the game. He doesn't really have any sort of control, and then his removal is not too strong against these enemy targets. He has no hard removal to just kill enemy units or kill them kind of regardless of the amount of health they have. Also, you can potentially get hard countered by I Am Inevitable power, because every time then you try to boost up your mana, you're buffing the entire enemy board by 2/2. So Jack really struggles in this adventure, so he's going down in the C tier. Janna is up next, and quite actually a solid champion into Lissandra. I think she's probably going to surprise many people. So for the Janna build that I highly recommend using if you can, is that Scourge's Stash plus Powder Monkeys. That gives you 4 cost reduction when you get your Plunder effect off, so you can play Janna for free. Now for Janna, all of her star powers are just plain cost reduced cards, so playing her for free triggers that. And then you go for the Found Fortune, so you draw the highest cost card that costs less than your base cost, grant an epic item, and reduce it down to be another 0 cost. So you're able to play her potentially round 1, and then play 2 other cards. So you're able to trigger your star powers, buffing up some of your units, but then also just reducing down the next cards you draw. And then Janna has the effect of when you draw more cards, she also reduces them down. So she just really helps you snowball incredibly early in the game. And she's actually able to mitigate Lissandra's increased cost with her own cost reduction. So you actually play a lot more cards into Lissandra than most other units can. And so while she's still not the best champion, she's actually a lot stronger than many people probably realize into Lissandra. I've played her 2 or 3 times into Lissandra and won every single one of them, which honestly surprised me. She's going into the top of B tier. Jax is up next and is another champion that Oath of the Guardians really is just the best build for. Normally Jax is very aggro and trying to rush down the enemy as fast as possible. While that works in most other situations, for Lissandra, she just has too much health for that to really be viable, and she has too many ways to shut down your champion or just any big units, which is why going for that Oath of the Guardians to try to spread out the amount of big units you have is very helpful. So while this build does work better for Lissandra than probably any other Jax build, he still doesn't utilize it quite as well as many others, such as Diana. So while he's still strong, he's going to the bottom of A tier. Jhin is up next, and he performs incredibly well. We've said it before, we'll say it again. Control really is the name of the game when it comes to Lissandra, and Jhin is able to do a massive amount of control, removal, so he is a amazing champion into Lissandra. As far as the build, pretty much the best to go for Gatebreaker into double Riptide Battery. So what this does is you play Jhin, the Gatebreaker triggers first. Also, it's important to have your Gatebreaker at the top, but it will trigger first, hit the Nexus, and then that will give you your Plunder effect. So both of your Riptide batteries will go off. Those deal damage to the enemy or the Nexus based on the cost of Jhin. So both of those are doing 4 skills, and Jhin is all about skills. So the fact that you're triggering 8 of them right when you play him is incredible. That scales him up by 8/8 and actually higher, because as skills go off, that triggers other ones of Jin's skills, which also makes a whole bunch of stun spells in your hand. So a really solid build, very simple. All you have to do is drop Jhin, don't really have to think about anything else. And he just gives you so much control that you're able to often easily close out the game. He was up there with Annie as far as champion that I didn't really get any crazy upgrades, but was still able to pretty easily just clear the entire Lissandra adventure. So he's going up in that S tier. Jinx is up next. Normally one of the best champions in the game, but really struggles right here. Again, I do like going for that double plunder build, so you can get Jinx on the board round 1 for a 0 cost, pairing that with the loose cannons payload so that she can immediately discard your hand, get that many pow pows, and pretty much annihilate the board. And then you're sitting there with your arsenal of pow pows, and you're trying to use that to just control and kill anything the enemy plays. Now, you do still have the issue that if the enemy is able to get I Am Inevitable as a power, you're essentially hard countered, because then every time you play a card, you're granting an enemy 1/1. So if you get unlucky and see that at all, you can still overcome it. I had to do that a couple times, but definitely makes things way harder. Overall, still a pretty decent champion, but you definitely struggle way more than you ever do in any other adventure. So she's not up in the S tier like she normally is. She's actually down in the bottom of A tier. Kaisa is up next, and don't think to anyone's surprise, she definitely struggles in this adventure. She's just really too slow to get off the ground, and she really relies on her units and herself to be able to get through and destroy the enemy. And often the enemy just has bigger units, so they don't care about your units at all. It can just block you, kill you. Not too much you can do. Also, again, if the enemy has I Am Inevitable, you essentially can't attack with Kaisa, because she's just going to massively buff up their entire board. As far as relics, still great to get the Starforged Gauntlets going. The Sharp Sight also gives you another keyword, so that's quite nice. And then the Beast Within, giving all your units Overwhelm. Very handy. Still, though, not a great champion for this adventure. She is going down in the C tier. Next up, then, we have Kane. Kane is an interesting one. A lot of the same issues that many of the other kind of scaling unit-focused decks have, such as like Garen. Especially unlike Garen, you actually have to kill enemy units to be able to scale. You do have some bonuses, though, in the fact that you have some sustain with your lifesteal unit, as well as when you level up and transform into Rost. It's not the worst out there, but still definitely struggles. As far as builds, I actually really like the Found Fortune and double Stalker's Blades. Now, you can still go for a Starforged Gauntlet build on Kane, going Starforge into Luminous, and then going potentially like Beast Within to give all your units 1/1 and Overwhelm. That's definitely still viable here, but I actually really like this build because you drop Kane, he is then able to pull out his highest cost card that costs less than his base cost, which has about a 50% chance of grabbing a scout unit. You're able to also grant that unit epic item, make it 0 cost for that round. Well, actually, I think it's permanent at this point. But then with a double Stalker's Blade, he gets 2 strikes off, hopefully getting kills, but even if not, he then gets recalled. You can play him again for a 0 cost. He then pulls out another unit, which again has a 50% chance to being a scout unit. You're making that unit 0 cost as well and granting it an epic item. Potentially you're going to draw out 2 copies of the same card. This is just a massive swing for you because you're able to get Kane on the board, potentially get a couple kills from dropping him twice, and then you can drop 2 units that are 4 costs normally, but now cost 0, and also have epic items on them. and normally that can really swing the match in your favor. So even though it's a little bit slower because you don't get that extra starting mana, it actually is a very powerful effect, and I definitely recommend trying it out. It surprised me with how well it went, but you can also always go for the Starforge Gauntlet build as well. Even though I think he's very fun, still has a lot of drawbacks in this adventure, so he's still going down in the C tier. Next up is Kindred. And this is probably going to surprise many people, but Kindred is actually very, very good in this adventure. Again, it's all down to control. With this build, we're going for Guardian Angel and then double Everfrost. Now, you can also go triple Everfrost if you want. I think the Guardian Angel is a little bit better, but triple Everfrost also solid. That Everfrost, if you don't know, it's when I'm summoned, stun the strongest unit. So when you play Kindred, they stun the two of the enemy's strongest units. The thing is, you're able to kill your Kindred from their second star power. It's a spell that kills the unit and then revives it. So you can trigger that on your Kindred to kill them, revive them. That triggers their summon effect, so their Everfrost will go off. And then if you have Guardian Angel, that is summoning another copy of your champion, so then they are also stunning potentially the two strongest units as well. So you just have such a ridiculous amount of control, and then also some very strong removal from Kindred's marks, as well as like your crumble spells that are just kill an enemy. Doesn't matter how much health they have. So because of the ridiculous amount of control you're able to put out with Kindred, they go up in the S tier. LeBlanc is up next. I don't think there's too much we need to say. LeBlanc is ridiculously strong, great starting deck, wonderful powers, and LeBlanc is just pretty ridiculously overpowered, and that still holds true right here. A lot of different builds you can actually go for LeBlanc. She's still a very versatile champion. You could even go for, again, like an Everfrost build with Kindred, but going for the Spectral Scissors plus Guardian's Orbs is very strong. You can attack with LeBlanc, summon a Ephemeral LeBlanc from your star powers, but then you're technically supporting it from your scissors as long as they're next to each other. And then that just becomes a infinite chain of LeBlancs filling up your entire board, all of them triggering those Guardian Orbs, just flooding your deck with epic items and making you unstoppable. LeBlanc is going up in that S tier. Lee Sin is up next, and I don't think most people will be too surprised with his performance. Still struggles like he does in many other adventures. He does have some things to help him out. His star powers can help you really surprise the enemy, and then you also have more controls than some other decks, so not the worst, but still not too great. As far as the build, Starforge plus Luminous really helping you not fall behind, and then Secret Technique, doubling the stats you gain from any of your combat tricks, or well, any of your spells that is, I find very helpful. That is a relic that you probably could swap out based on your personal preference, but doubling the effectiveness of your combat tricks is quite handy. Still though, Lee Sin not performing too well. He's going down in that C tier. Leona is up next, and unfortunately got a bit of a nerf from the last patch. They fixed the quote-unquote bug with Oath of the Guardians for her, where it used to make a whole bunch of morning lights in hand. Unfortunately, that is now gone, so a little bit disappointing. But still, overall, solid champion, really good control as well as scaling. Pairs very well with the Starforge Gauntlets and Luminous Orb. That extra mana feels very strong on you. And Secret Technique, really handy for buffing up all your units. Leona has a lot of spells that just hit her entire board, buffing them all up. So doubling that effect is very good. Normally you can just stun the entire enemy board, attack with your own full board that's massively buffed up, and annihilate the enemy. So very solid champion, going in that bottom of A tier. Lilia is up next, one of the new additions to the game and a very good champion. Her ability to trigger summon effects and control the board is amazing. You have so many ways to protect your own units, especially from the enemy's obliterates, safely keeping them in your own little landmark. Also, you are incredible with many builds, but especially the Guardian Orbs, being able to just constantly summon your champion and scale your units to pretty ridiculous levels. Now, while Guardian Orbs themselves are very good, you can actually swap out potentially one of them and throw in a Everfrost, that same common relic we used for Kindred, which will stun the strongest enemy unit. That's also very valuable. That's a good alternative as well. Stalker's Blades are also solid, but I think a little bit weaker, especially into Lissandra. That Echoing Spirit, though, very nice, making sure you get your Lilia. And then since you have more of her in your deck, as you're playing her, your Lilia is more likely to get epic items on them because the Guardian Orbs just grant epic items to random cards in your deck. But the more you have of one card, the more likely it's going to get hit. So more likely your Lilia is going to get buffed up by those Guardian Orbs. And then also that reduces down the cost of her champion spell, which is one of your sleep spells. So you can potentially trigger those summon mechanics even more. Overall, very good champion. Highly recommend playing them. They are up in the S tier. Lux is up next. Still a solid champion, but definitely gets hurt by Lissandra and her increased costs. Often with Lux, you're great at being able to make a lot of these zero cost spells and then chain them all together in a specific round. That actually gets shut down pretty hard by Lissandra. So still a solid champion, but definitely weaker than normal. As far as her build, going for the Starforged Gauntlets and Luminous, really helpful, especially because then you are able to immediately play one of your 3-cost spells that gives you an extra mana gem. So you can actually ramp up even faster. Arcane Comet then also paired very nicely. 6-cost spell for you to play, also helps you obliterate an enemy unit, giving you some really nice, strong, hard removal. So still overall solid, but definitely on the weaker side compared to where she normally is. She is the top of B tier. Next up then, we have the better version of Lux. Lux Illuminated, one of the new champions. Overall, a very strong champion and much better than the old Lux in most parts of the game. However, in Lissandra, she definitely still struggles. Again, very much just a unit-focused deck that's focused on scaling up her units and attacking with this massive board. The issue is the entire Lissandra adventure has so many ways to shut that down just with Frostbite and Obliterates. So definitely still good, but a lot weaker than in most other aspects of the game. As far as the best build, really love the Fear Cleaving Axe. Boosting all of your units is so strong, really helps you level up incredibly quickly. And then once she's leveled, all of her spirit generation is doubled. So then attacking with the axe is even more ridiculous. Crown Guard Inheritance pairs incredibly well with Lux because you level up when you attack. So you boost all your units, you have this massive board, you attack, you level, you rally, then you can immediately attack again and boost up all your units even more because now your spirit generation is doubled. That's also why I like pairing the Deceiver's Crest, because that gives you your champion spell. It makes it cost 0 when you level up. So now you're rallying, and you also have this champion spell to further just scale all of your units out of control. Really wonderful for just rushing down and ending games incredibly quickly. Often you can level with your very first attack with Lux. Now I will say the Deceiver's Crest, while I do like it, you could always go for either an Overwhelm relic, such as like the Beast Within or Troll King's Crown, or you could also pair the Greenglade Shadeleaf to grant your supported ally Elusive. That also can be very good, especially into Lissandra. So there are some alternatives for that bottom relic slot, but I think the first two are pretty solidified. Overall, her ranking is down in the bottom 8 tier. Master Yi is up next. Normally a incredibly strong champion that can end games in the first round by going essentially infinite with spells. Unfortunately, Lissandra really reduces that game plan. And so instead of going for like a secret technique build, I think going Echoing Spirit actually is quite handy. You can play him round 1, get those extra champions, get multiple other win conditions on the board. And so you're not just relying on your Master Yi. Even though he does somewhat get countered by Lissandra, still overall very solid champion going in that top of A tier. Misfortune is up next, rocking a very fun build, especially for pretty much every other part of the game. You'll absolutely dominate, but still on the weaker side for Lissandra. As far as the build, Spectral Scissors, Beast Within, and Death's Foil. Death's Foil giving you +1 damage and making it so you can't die or take damage when you attack. Really great for Misfortune because she's very squishy on the attack. Beast Within, so all of your units have that overwhelm. Again, really handy for Misfortune if the enemy dies to your skills. Your attack doesn't fizzle and you can still hit the enemy. Spectral Scissors then, amazing for Misfortune being able to support your Powder Monkeys. So you get another Powder Monkey on the board, just putting the pressure on the enemy really early. Issue is though, Misfortune often can just get shut down pretty hard by Lissandra herself. Lissandra and her Ice Shards can just wreck your entire board. And so even though you can actually dominate most of the challenges up to her, you still just get shut down really hard. Misfortune can often run out of steam, and she is still your main win condition. And so pretty simple target for the enemy to just obliterate. So unfortunately, she's going down in the C tier. Mordekaiser is up next, and he's another one I think many people will probably be surprised by. As far as the build, I think this is really the best way to go with him is Starforge to, of course, get that +1 starting mana, Disciple of Shadows to get some great cost reduction for your Mordekaiser, and then even if you kill all of your own units, that's contributing towards your level up, but then you're immediately reviving them all, so there's really no downside whatsoever. Then Corrupted Star Fragment, again, you're getting all those buffs in your Mordekaiser, then you're reviving the unit, so again, no downsides. And Mordekaiser actually has a large amount of drain built into his kit, and so normally you can actually stabilize and then end up being able to end the game just through the amount of removal and sustain you actually have. So while you are still very unit focused and still have many of the other weaknesses of the more unit focused decks, the fact that you're able to constantly revive your own units, so even if the enemy tries to kill them, doesn't necessarily matter to you. And then you also have really solid kill spells, even ones that kill the entire enemy board. So you can normally last into that late game and then just drain your way to victory. He's definitely still on the weaker side, but actually a lot better than I think most people expect. He's going to the bottom of B tier. Morgana is up next. This will be pretty simple. Control, absolutely amazing for Lissandra. And Morgana essentially has more control than anyone else in the game, as well as some handy lifesteal for more sustain. For the Lissandra adventure, Morgana destroys all of it other than it that stares. If you see that node, avoid it at all costs. That is the one adventure that actually counters you because all their curses go to a 0 cost. But other than that, you're pretty much able to dominate the entire adventure, even Lissandra. As far as builds, really like the Packed Powder. Try to get your Morgana on the board a bit earlier, and then you get some consistent scaling throughout the entire game. From your second star power, you're normally dealing damage to the enemy nexus every single round. So that really helps your Morgana just continually scale. And then Archangel Staff, make sure you have the mana for your champion spell. Grand General's Counterplan to give you that champion spell, gives you more controls, more ways to curse enemies, and then that Invoke for potentially even more control on the board. Really solid, going up in that S tier. Nami is up next. Normally an amazing S tier champion, but Lissandra's mechanics of punishing you for playing a lot of spells or cards in a single round definitely hurts you. Now you're still able to get around this more than some other units, but definitely still hits you pretty hard. You do have that extra sustain though, which can really help you out, especially since sustain is so valuable in this adventure. And you're still a very aggressive early champion, able to end games incredibly quickly. So while she's definitely lower than she is in most other parts of the game, she's still pretty high up there in that A tier. Next up, we have Nasus, and I've tried very hard to make Nasus work. As far as the build, going for that Disciple of Shadows, you can try to get Nasus on the board a bit earlier. If he kills any of his units, it's just going to help his own scaling. Secret Technique, actually very fun with Nasus because it makes your Siphoning Strike grant all your champions 4/4 instead of just 2/2. So some pretty crazy scaling right there. And then Oath of the Guardians to try to get some of those other champions that you're buffing up with your Siphoning Strike and just spreading out your amount of big units. While this is a very fun build for Nasus and makes him feel better, he's still very weak and gets shut down hard by Lissandra. He's going down in the D tier. Nico is up next with a playstyle very similar to many of the other champions, but unfortunately weaker than kind of all of them, especially since the recent Lost Chapter nerfs. She's rocking the same Guardian Orb build, such as both LeBlanc and Lilia. Unfortunately with Nico, you're still more limited than the other two. As far as the build though, Echoing Spirits, you get more Nikos, and then if you have Nico on the board, your champion spell, which is able to summon another copy of Nico, costs less. So overall, very solid. The Guardian Orb is to help you buff up your entire deck. Unfortunately, since they changed the Lost Chapter to a play effect and not a summon effect, that really hurt Nico and reduced the amount you could spam and play her, especially in the early parts of the game. So while she is still a good champion, definitely less consistent than some of the other Guardian Orb wielders. That being said, you can always go for Oath of the Guardian build. So you throw on Oath plus double star gems, so you can get Nico on the board and then also play around with throwing those other champions on there. And you might even get some more cost reduction from your star powers for some of those champions. So overall, still good, but not quite as good as many might expect. She's going to the top of B tier. Nidalee is up next, and I think we all know where she's going. With the Spectral Scissors, she is potentially the best champion in the entire game, and this build right here absolutely destroys everything. So Spectral Scissors, Tempest Blade, and Lost Chapter. If you're interested, I have a video of my channel of Nidalee defeating the entire Lissandra adventure in about 5 minutes. So that should really be all the information you need. Nidalee, especially with this build, is absolutely unstoppable. She's going up in the S tier. Nila is up next, another 2-cost rocking the Oath of the Guardians build. Nila has her own little special flair on it though, because she can potentially duplicate the champions that she gets, since she puts them all in her deck if she draws any of them or a fleeting copy of them. When she plays them, you'll get 2 of them, which can be incredibly powerful. That being said, that's definitely not consistent to do, and she still struggles overall in this adventure, so she's actually just going down to the bottom of B tier. Norah is up next, another new addition to the game, and is absolutely an incredible champion. Now, I think there are many different ways you can actually go with Norah for builds, even into Lissandra. This one is my favorite though. So you have the Transmogulator first, so that's support my ally and transform them into a unit that costs 3 more. That actually triggers your star powers, giving them those extra stats. Then you have the Spectral Scissors, so you summon another copy of your supported unit attacking. So that counts as another created unit. And then you're able to use your Corrupted Star Fragment to get all those stats from your first supported unit on your Norah. You just put so much pressure on the enemy early, and you have an entire board of massive attackers. If the enemy kills any of your units, it doesn't matter because your portals are just going to summon more of them. Norah is really one of the few unit-focused aggro decks that can absolutely demolish the enemy. She's going up in that S tier. Ornn is up next and feeling way better after the recent buffs to him. Still has some issues with his kit, especially his second star power, but overall a massive improvement from where he used to be. Normally he was down chilling with Nasus in the bottom of every tier list. Not going to be the case this time. As far as builds, he works really well with some epic relics, and this is my favorite build for Ornn. I really think it is his best build. So we have the Starforge Gauntlets paired with the Spectral Scissors and Death's Foil. That gives Ornn actually Titanic, so he gets that extra starting mana. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to play Ornn, you're going to have him attack, supporting the ram that he summons once he's leveled, which normally you can have happen before you play your Ornn. He's able to support that ram and then make another copy of it attacking. So you just have Ornn and these 2 massive rams that are going to absolutely destroy the enemy nexus. And then because of the Death's Foil, your Ornn can't take damage or die. Really fun build and makes Ornn feel so much better as a champion. Still not incredible in the grand scheme of things compared to all the other champions, but miles above where he used to be. He is now in the bottom of B tier. Pike is up next. Very fun champion. Can still struggle a little bit. Feel like he was over nerfed a couple months ago, bringing him up to a 5 cost. Especially considering his pretty tragic stat line. But once you have him maxed out with the right relics, I think he is still very good. As far as relics, same build I've used on a couple other champions, such as like Gnar, but the double plunder relics, so you can get Ornn on the board very early. The Pack Powder also giving you some decent scaling for your Pike, on top of the scaling you're already getting from the Lurk. And then the Beast Within, very, very good for you. Giving all your units that overwhelm is incredibly powerful, but then also all your units have the subtype of Lurker, so your entire deck also gets that extra 1/1. Very, very good. Now you're still a unit-focused deck. The enemy has a lot of ways to shut you down, but you have a lot more scaling and potential than most other decks in the game, or at least most other unit decks. So Pike is actually in the bottom of B tier. Next up is Samira, another champion that's normally way up in like the S tier. Fortunately gets countered pretty hard by Lissandra. I believe the developer for the adventure said that during their playtesting, Lissandra had a 0% win rate. And after playing my like normal Lissandra build, definitely believe it. However, with the Oath of the Guardians, she is actually incredible. Because you can play Samira round 1, you have your double star gems giving you 4 cost reduction. But then from your star powers, you can get an extra 3 cost reduction, so you can potentially get 7 mana off of whatever champions you created. So Samira with this build actually really shines and is very strong. She is going to the top of B tier. Up next is Set. Now Set is one that often in tier list, he's on the like lower half fairly often, but into the Lissandra adventure, he really shines. Now this is the build I like to go with him, but you could also go for Starforge Gauntlets, Luminous Orb, and then the Chemtech Duplicator. That would still be also a solid build. But if you want to go for all rare relics, I think this works out pretty well. With Set, you can normally ramp up to that 6 mana. And once you get Set on the board with that Chemtech Duplicator, you're generating all these coins, able to refill all your mana. And while the Lissandra mana tax of increasing all your mana by 3, well, all the cost of all your cards by 3, while that can be rough, for Set, his star powers and his level up condition is about spending more mana. And so that it actually can help you level up and trigger your star powers, like your rallies and board scaling even more. Also with Set, you not only have board-wide scaling, rallies that you can trigger multiple times in a single round. Once he's leveled, he also gets Obliterate, so he can obliterate enemy units, including Lissandra or her Watcher, which is incredibly satisfying. And then you also have a lot of CC through recalls and stuns. So Set actually really shines in the Lissandra adventure. So he's actually going all the way up in the top of A tier. Next up, we have Tahm Kench. Now, unfortunately, Tahm Kench really struggles with Lissandra. As far as the build, I feel like you have to go for Starforge Gauntlets. Pairing that with Chosen of the Stars and the Fist is pretty solid. The main issue, though, is once again, Tahm Kench is your main unit, your main win condition. And so Lissandra will very often just obliterate him off the board. Also, you're just not able to reliably scale up your units. The enemy just is often able to overpower you throughout the entire course of the adventure. And overall, Tahm Kench is just really hard countered by Lissandra overall, so he's going down in that D tier. Talia is up next. Overall, pretty solid. Not the greatest, not the worst. As far as the build, really good with the Starforge Gauntlets. I know we showcased that on most of the builds, but with Talia, it actually feels better than most other champions. Being able to potentially get 2 or even 3 of your landmarks counting down round 1 is very nice. You can then pop them all round 2, have some pretty massive attacks. And also, I like throwing on that rally for Talia, so when you drop her, you get another attack token. Although that one is definitely a little bit more optimal, or optional, I should say. You could throw on like a Blade Rack or Corrupted Star Fragment there. Also, Talia does have some interesting interactions where you can actually destroy the enemy's landmarks. Overall, though, pretty middle of the road. She is the bottom of B tier. Next up then, we have Teemo. And Teemo is a bit of an interesting one. Often you're just a little bit too low tempo, so the enemy will be able to overwhelm you very quickly. While you do have some tools for dealing with larger targets, normally those get exhausted pretty quickly. And so Teemo can very much struggle. That's why my go-to build for Teemo is very cheesy. And it's that Spectral Scissors, Death's Foil, and a Star Gem. So what you're trying to do is reroll absolutely everything for either a Shadow Totem or Stabilize, so that when you play Teemo, you get a ephemeral copy. That way you can attack with your Teemo, support the ephemeral one, and then have just a board full of Teemos all attacking, putting a ton of pressure on the enemy. Obviously, though, that one is a bit inconsistent because you actually have to get lucky with getting Stabilize or Shadow Totem. And consistency is really the issue with Teemo. So while you can go for this build and try to get lucky and use your rerolls for one of those powers or items, if you get it, great. Otherwise, it will be a rough time. So you could always just go for like a Oath of the Guardians build with Oath and double Star Gems, and you'll still probably do okay. Overall, though, just relying on your puff caps and trying to go for a playstyle that's more focused on those just gets absolutely rushed down and destroyed by the enemy. So he's not enjoying his time in the Lissandra adventure. He is down in the bottom of B tier, which is generally pretty low for Teemo. Porok King is up next, and I absolutely love triple epic relic Porok King. So you go for Spirit of the Buru. So essentially all your Poros start with 3 keywords, being Quick Attack, Fury, and Overwhelm. You go for the Beast Within, so all of your Poros have an additional 1/1. And then Norah's Relic, so that all of your created units, such as a lot of the Poros you're generating, have impact. With this build, your Poros are able to trigger your star powers of giving your board 2/2 every round start. So you're just able to play a whole bunch of Poros very quickly, flood your board, and then they just scale out of control every single round. It's a very passive build where you don't need to have Porok King on the board ever, and you normally can just absolutely overwhelm and outscale the enemy. They don't have a single target for them to kill because your entire board is massive, and if they destroy any of your units, you can just quickly replace them and work on scaling them back up. So a ridiculously strong champion, especially if you have the epic relics for it. I will say Spirit of the Buru is by far the most important. The other two, while still helping you out, are not nearly as impactful. Spirit of the Buru is definitely doing the hard carrying here. So as long as you have that, your Porok King is still going to be amazing. I will say though, for Porok King, if you don't have epic relics, especially Spirit of the Buru, he's going to be much lower. So for this tier list, with this build, he is up in the A tier. If you don't have this build, then he's probably more down in like the C tier, to be honest. Next up then, we have Thresh. Now Thresh relatively recently got some decent buffs, but does still somewhat struggle overall into Lissandra. As far as the relic build, Disciple of Shadows plus Succubus Brand is incredible. You can pretty consistently get 3 units on the board before you play Thresh. So you play him, that Disciple of Shadows kills all of them, and then gives you 3 husks. You then play 1 other unit, which consumes all the husks, leveling up your Thresh, which you can potentially do in the same round you play him. So that's incredibly powerful. And then with Oath of the Guardians, you have these big champions that Thresh can pull out with his leveled up attack. And when things go according to plan, you can have Thresh attacking turn 2 with some massive champions backing him up. Very fun, but can be a bit inconsistent, especially into Lissandra. And so even though he's better than he used to be, still not great into this adventure, and so he is down in the C tier. Varus is up next, and despite being normally pretty overpowered, actually gets countered pretty hard into Lissandra. So for Varus, almost all of your spells are duplicated, and while that normally is a amazing benefit to have into Lissandra, both of those spells count as 2 different cards being played. So you trigger Lissandra's cost increase very quickly. And so you're actually limited in how many spells you can actually play, which is why we're going with this build right here. So Secret Technique, all the stats you gain from spells is doubled. Pairing that with Hymn of Valor, which fully heals your target and then doubles their stats. And then Lost Chapter. So we're able to play Varus, refill our mana, create a Hymn of Valor that costs 3 so we can immediately play it. So when we play it on Varus, it's getting doubled by his star powers, and then the stats you get are getting doubled by the Secret Technique. You're trying to use this now absolutely massive unit to essentially one-shot the enemy. The issue is Lissandra has a lot of ways to deal with you. She can just frostbite you, obliterate you, and you're out of luck. So struggles with inconsistency and really gets shut down hard by Lissandra. So he's going to the bottom of B tier. Vayne is up next, another champion that really benefits from triple epic relics. With Vayne, the build we're going with is Chosen of the Stars, or Chosen by the Stars, Death's Foil, and the Spectral Scissors. Now I will say the Spectral Scissors here is very much just a bonus. We're mainly using it for the stats, so if you just want to throw on like the Warhammer for 2 power and 1 health, that is a decent alternative here. It's just since I had the relic, I threw it on, but normal stat relic would also work. But the beauty of this build is, since we're equipping Vayne, that is triggering her augment of playing to create a card, that being the equipment, or like her tumble. We're targeting her, so that's triggering the Fated. She already starts with 6 power, and then the extra power you're getting from the equipment is triggering your 10 power threshold to trigger your empowered effect from Chosen of the Stars. So you're able to do that very quickly, giving you a massive Vayne that can safely attack and not worry about taking damage. And then you have the bonus from the scissors if you see an opportunity to use it, like if you get stabilized or Shadow Totem with your Vayne, but you're not necessarily relying on that. So this is a very fun build. Definitely runs into some issues, especially with the fact that Vayne is once again your main win condition. So very easy target for the enemy to frostbite or obliterate, but still a very solid build. So she's going to the top of B tier. Next up then, we have Veigar, our favorite tiny master of evil. Now, control, incredibly good into Lissandra, and Veigar is really able to control the board either with his stuns or just taking out enemy targets with his darkness. Really enjoy this build, and again, it is a rare relic only build. I know there's not that many of them, and you could actually swap out some of these for epic relics as well. But Scourge's stash could replace it with Packed Powder, but 2 cost reduction to try to get Veigar on the board earlier so we can start scaling up your darkness. Luden's Tempest to increase the damage of all your darkness. And then normally you're going to get to that 6 mana. And with that Chemtech duplicator, that is when you're able to just absolutely annihilate the enemy nexus and end the game. With Veigar, you can pretty consistently just stall out the game till that 6 mana and stockpile those darkness in the hand and quickly annihilate the enemy. You can play very defensively, not having to take any risks and also not having to rely on your units almost at all. And so Veigar actually really shines in this adventure. He goes to the top of A tier. Next up then, we have Vex, another new addition to the game, and unfortunately one that really is struggling at the moment. Fortunately for Vex, you don't have a lot of, or really any hard removal for just taking out large enemy threats. While you're trying to stack up your Gloom, that normally doesn't matter when the enemy is dropping units that have double-digit stats. Your couple stacks of Gloom doesn't really mean much there. As far as a relic build, this one works pretty well. I've tested a lot of different builds on Vex, really trying to make them work. But this build, Echoing Spirits, you try to get a bunch of extra Vex, get them on the board, which is pretty important because once Vex is leveled, she doubles all of your Gloom generation. And because of your second star power, that's essentially doubling all the damage from your spells. So Vex, very important to have on the board. So Echoing Spirit is great for that. Once you have Vex on the board, you then also have extra copies. So if your Vex dies, you can play them again. Also, your champion spell with Echoing Spirit is a 1-cost Gloom an enemy, draw 1, which is really nice to have, especially with the other relics we're going with. Chemtech Duplicator, once you hit 6 mana, all your spells are doubled. You're almost always hitting that 6 mana unless you're dead beforehand. And then actually the Loose Cannon's Payload. So when you summon your Vex, you discard your entire hand, make that many Pow Pows. Those Pow Pows are a 2-cost burst, deal 3 to an enemy. Now with your second star power, all the damage you do from spells and skills is converted into Gloom. The problem is Vex essentially has next to no spells or skills that deal damage in her base kit. So you have to run this to be able to have enough spells and skills to actually generate that Gloom. Now the crazy thing is, once Vex is leveled, your damage is essentially doubled. So instead of dealing 3 damage, it's now dealing 6 damage, which is converted into Gloom from your 1 Pow Pow. Once you hit that 6 mana though, that spell's going off twice. So now you're dealing essentially 12 damage for every Pow Pow. So really nice right there. This build, one of the best to go with for Vex. Overall though, Vex is often just too slow and gets shut down by most opponents throughout the entire adventure. So while this build can work, don't get too excited, unfortunately. Vex is down in that D tier. Vi is up next, and really is another champion that, while they were fine on release, I feel like has just been power crept really hard by the entire rest of the roster, and she really struggles throughout the Lissandra adventure. As far as the build, this one is quite fun. You're going for Scourge's Stash plus Packed Powder. That gives you a 1-cost Vi after your cost reduction. And then the Spirit of the Buru, making all of your 1-cost units have Quick Attack, Fury, and Overwhelm. So you have those 3 keywords. And then once you drop your 1-cost Vi, she gets all of those, as well as the Tough and Challenger that she already has, making your Vi incredibly powerful and a champion you can potentially draw turn 1 so she can start scaling off of her second star power. So this is a very fun build. The issue is you're still just only having your unit. You're not really being supported by your star powers almost at all. And so you have a very easy target for the enemy to just frostbite, obliterate, and get rid of. So overall, an incredibly weak champion. Not necessarily because they were inherently bad, just because they've been power crept so hard by everyone else. Vi is down in that D tier. Next up then, we have Volibear. Champion I was very excited for, the first champion I took into Lissandra. Unfortunately, Volibear actually gets shut down pretty hard in this adventure. As far as relics, going for the Starforge Gauntlets for the extra mana, Disciple of Shadows for the extra cost reduction to get your Volibear on the board as soon as possible. If you kill any of your units, you get extra sigils, which is great. And then also going with the Found Fortune, so that Volibear will pull out another, often Titanic unit that you can then play for free. So overall, really solid build. But again, normally you just have a couple very big units, and Lissandra is normally able to just frostbite you, obliterate you, and stall to the point where you end up losing the game, unfortunately. I went into the adventure thinking Volibear was going to be one of the best, but he actually just got shut down pretty hard every time I went in. So while he is still decent overall as a champion for this adventure, definitely way lower than I was actually expecting, he is going to the top of B tier. Almost done, we have Yasuo, very solid champion, very control heavy champion, so probably know where he's going. As far as a build, I really like going for the Tempest Blade so that he can stun the entire enemy board. Everfrost so that when you play him, he again stuns the strongest enemy unit. And then the Grand General's Counterplan so that you have another stun, another cheap stun for when the enemy attacks. Then if they kill your Yasuo, you have a backup copy that you can play to keep him on the board. Really solid into Lissandra with all your stuns and recalls. So he's going up in that S tier. Last up then, we have Yuumi. Now for Yuumi, you're actually pretty solid. I like going for the Disciple of Shadows. You can play Yuumi round 1 often for free because they don't trigger she doesn't trigger that damage effect. Beast Within to give all your units Overwhelm and 1/1. I find this superior to the Spirit of the Buru, and then Gale Force to also give whatever unit you attach to Scout, and because of Yuumi's interesting interaction with relics, that unit won't actually get recalled by the Gale Force, because when you attach with Yuumi, you're only bringing over stats and keywords. Yuumi is actually pretty good in this adventure, really able to scale up your units, and you can often buff up several units at the same time, so Lissandra doesn't have as easy of a time picking a target to destroy. Also, you have some mini morphs, so some great removal to just, at burst speed, transform whatever the enemy's unit is into a 3/3. Still not overall amazing, but definitely better than average. Yuumi is going to the top of B tier. So that is it for the tier list into Lissandra. Again, this is considering all epic relics and everyone is at their top power. This is the most difficult challenge in the game and is very much meant for late game units and decks. So if you're struggling with this on a low level champion or you don't have all of your relics unlocked, that's kind of the point that will be something you have to deal with. This is really the challenge where you want to throw your most OP character at in order to succeed. Now, if you want to be able to clear Lissandra, definitely look at those, especially in the S tier. The control decks are very good. Now, I will potentially make another tier list that only uses rare relics, but if I do that, that's probably going to take a very long time because I test out all of the builds. So I'd have to play literally everyone again into Lissandra potentially multiple times. So I might do that, but if I do, it'll definitely take a while to complete. It took me a very long time to put this together. So if you enjoyed the video, definitely like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a great day.